All right. Well, thank you for coming to the Grim Wisdom Podcast. This is Grant Metz. Idea, as always, is we're going to give you some enlightenment, and it's going to be of an unpleasant nature. With me today is Maura Walsh. She's running for state rep here in Rhode Island in a district just a little bit to the north of mine, actually, just the next one up, if you will. And I was really excited to have her on today because she's such a, well, I'd say a non-traditional candidate. I don't even know if, like, because you shouldn't be a non-traditional candidate, but, you know, you're not a lawyer and you're not an heir, so that makes you profoundly different in every meaningful sense than every other representative in the House. And
also not a man. So
also not a man, so you got that going
me out
for
of
you.
a couple, yeah.
Yeah. Also not male. And so, yeah, I thought we could start by talking about some of the scandals that we've heard about this week, because that's going to dovetail into Maura's opponent, who I guess has cancer, so we're supposed to feel bad for him. Like, he just now said, oh, yeah, I know that I was caught trying to get the state to forgive my $100,000 tax bill. And I know I cheated some dudes on a business deal, took possession of property that I never paid for, but I have cancer, so you should feel bad for me. I guess that's his closing argument for the election. But I guess we'll see about that. But anyway, no, the big news this week was a Providence City Councilman, this dude Kevin Jackson, is it right? Yeah, Kevin Jackson. Maura's nodding. You can't see, but she's nodding.
Sorry, yes.
Hey, if you don't say it, they don't hear it.
I
yes.
forget. Yes.
Use your words.
Use your big girl words.
And he was caught embezzling money through a sports charity for kids, which he did apparently over a number of years, and the amounts in question are quite substantial. I mean, it's like, what, over $100,000 that he's accused of having taken?
Kevin Jackson?
Yeah, having embezzled.
I believe so. I mean, I don't know the exact figure on that one. He's not in my neighborhood.
Right.
I've heard it's pretty exorbitant. Yeah.
I think I was reading in the...
Well, it's 2 misdemeanors and 2 felonies.
Yeah, I think I was reading in the Go Local... Go Local Prov in the article that it was over 6 figures. But it's funny because, you know, we're talking about corruption. We talked about legislative grants last time, and it's interesting because the legislative grant program, it's essentially legalized bribery where the speaker doles out legislative grants. He doles out this free money to the various representatives based on their willingness to swear fealty to him, and then they use it to bribe community organizations in their district who often reciprocate with favors of an informal nature or otherwise are supportive. But basically, what's interesting about that, though, is that in a lot of cases, these are very small grants, legislative grants. They're, you know, like $3,000 to an Elks Club, or, you know, $4,000 to a local sports team, right? And then the sports team, they compensate you by putting up a big billboard with your name on it at their stadium so all the parents see it. So it's definitely corruption of a sort, but it's such a small number, right? It goes unnoticed, right? Whereas all of these large, high-profile scandals that we've heard about in the last few weeks have been just very large sums of money by normal human standards. I mean, that Rep. Gallison, he took over $100,000 is what it appears like now. He took 6 figures, and then this guy Kevin Jackson has been indicted. He took 6 figures, and then Maura's opponent has a 6-figure tax debt, which he was trying to. He had dropped a bill that would have made there be a statute of limitations on tax debt, which is interesting because I think I owe the state like $1,000 or some small number. And when a normal person doesn't pay their taxes,
they will take it from your flesh.
They take it from your flesh.
Yeah.
And the way they do that is they cut off your ability to get a driver's license or register a vehicle, which means unless you're prepared to drive and transport yourself completely illegally, ultimately you're going to have to pay that debt back or come out with it. So it's interesting how they're talking about putting in statute of limitations on tax debt, but of like 10 years, and that would let this guy get out of his huge tax debt. But it's interesting because ordinary people can't float a tax debt of any size for 10 years. So it will almost be relevant to ordinary people.
Yeah, I think it's very interesting that a lot of these things, a lot of these corruption charges and a lot of these scandals all stem from the main issue of a lack of accountability. We have all of 3 people who work at the Board of Elections, who are in charge of all the campaign finance for the entire state, for councilmen and reps and senators, and that's an unreasonable, untenable burden to put on their shoulders. And does it surprise me that gone unchecked for this many years, people feel comfortable going big or going home, as it were, in terms of embezzling? Not really, because we've made it abundantly clear as a state that that's not a priority of ours, that large-scale corporate espionage is not as important as arresting Black kids smoking joints. We've established that doling out multi-millions of dollars to subsidize the Superman building or 38 studios or a new Paw Sox stadium is somehow any less egregious than a homeless person panhandling.
Yeah.
And it's like this really weird split of things that we've decided, or the General Assembly has decided on our behalf, are our quote unquote priorities. I mean, you saw Chacon's bill to make it illegal to have your tree hang into your neighbor's yard.
Oh, yeah.
Like, do you think that that's what's really affecting us in Rhode Island? Do you think that that there are people who are struggling to pay their rent every month that are really going to have their lives improved by their neighbor raking the yard? No, you're out of your mind.
Right. And it's interesting.
And you're out of touch.
The example that I usually use is a few years ago, because I get news feeds from a lot of different people, and not all of them have the same exact priorities as I do. And some people care a lot about animal cruelty. I'm not saying I'm for animal cruelty, but it's relatively low down on my radar. So there was this bill, I think it was last year actually, it was going to ban battery cages. And I said, oh, we should ban battery cages. Well, the battery cage bill, it would have banned battery cages. Just so you know, they're cages the size of a car battery that you put a chicken into for its entire life. That's why they're called battery cages. And I mean, it's pretty messed up. But the bill said, oh yeah, we're not going to allow any battery cages except the ones that already exist. Those farms that already have battery cages are all exempted from this law. But they won't be allowed to put any new battery cages into service after like 1 year. They'll have to stop putting them into service, and then they'll have 20 years to get rid of them. So I'm like, so what you're saying is those people that already have battery cages, not only are you making their business not illegal, not only are you making sure they have no competition for the battery cage market niche, right? But also you're giving them 20 years, whereas, if you didn't have anything, the next year somebody could come along and ban them. Whereas if anybody tries to now, the legislature will say, well, we already banned them. So I thought that was pretty messed up when I reviewed that bill. But the really fun part of the story is at the same time, there were like 5 other bills in the hopper for the committee to consider. And I looked at those too, just on a lark. And 2 of them were just attaboys, naming the Memorial Park bench after the rep that had found the funding for it. To express the sentiment of the House that so-and-so is a great guy, blah, blah, and a wonderful lawyer and heir, because that's what they all are. And but the one that really got me was there was a bill that would make it legal to have parrots in public campgrounds, right? And when you look at that bill and you know exactly what happened, right? You can't see this, but Maura has this look on her face like she's completely baffled. And you know exactly what happened with that bill. Some powerful guy, some powerful lunatic likes to take his loud, obnoxious parrot to campgrounds where it keeps everybody up, right? Because, of course, if the parrot were quiet, why would anybody report it? Who cares if you have a parrot at the campground, right? But the parrot must have been a nuisance. And so the law
Probably a
says,
Republican parrot, like shouting out racial slurs and
right. So somebody got cited because it's technically illegal to have any animal except a dog or a cat at a campground. And he complained to his state rep buddy and got his state rep buddy to drop a bill that would let probably one person, it's got to be one.
It's one dude.
You
it's
know it.
one dude with a parrot just cheering in his Margaritaville t-shirt like, today's the day, Polly.
Right.
Today's the day they can't tell us to leave.
And that's what these clowns do. Is they're in such a bubble that's their priority, is dropping bills to help one ass clown with a parrot take his parrot to campgrounds where it can annoy everyone else with the
What if
sanction of
it's
state
not
law.
even like a constituent? What if it's just an actual representative who just loves his parrot? And he's like, I got elected just so I could pass this one bill.
Well, I mean,
Once I'm done, we're out. Me and Polly are taking off. We're going to tour all the campgrounds in RI.
you could almost respect that. I was talking to Jennifer
That's a
Siciliano.
long con,
Yeah.
dude. That's the long
Yeah.
con.
Yeah, I was talking to Jennifer Siciliano about, this was like, God, about 8 months back or 9 months back, about some dude up in Woonsocket whose political career was because he wanted to have chickens in his backyard,
Oh,
and they
that's-
wouldn't let him. So it's like, well, I'm going to run for office so I can have chickens, right? So I can
I
kind
mean,
of,
respect. Like, I'm not even like,
yeah,
it's selfish, yeah, but like, is it any more selfish than Kevin Jackson stealing from Little Leaguers?
well, I mean, it's at least honest. At least you're acting from your very narrow, self-interested passions, right? And I don't think that dude was an heir and a lawyer. I think he was probably a lawyer, but not an heir. Anyway, I forget the details.
One or
So,
t'other.
so, point is, yeah, I think you're right. It's this focus on things that do not matter at the expense of things that do matter is I think endemic to the problem. So tell us a little about your campaign then. I mean, I definitely want to trash your opponent some more because yeah, he has cancer.
Maybe we
right?
can pass. Maybe we can pass on that.
Yeah,
We'll see.
I mean, like maybe Moore doesn't really feel comfortable talking mean about a guy who has cancer because Moore's not as big a jerk as I am.
Well, that's insult
right?
to very serious injury, and I think that, I'm
Yeah,
I'm
I mean,
running
for
this-
all I know, I have cancer, right? I'm sure there are millions of Rhode Islanders who have cancer who don't know it yet because they were kicked off of their Medicaid by the budget that this jerk-off voted for, right?
I will say that my mother actually just recovered from stage 2 breast cancer this past year. And one of the most frustrating experiences that we found throughout the entire thing would be when people would say, oh, you're so brave for continuing to work through all of this. And my mom would be like, I don't want to work. Like, you're aware that I don't want to work 40 hours and then go get chemotherapy, right? Like, if I don't work, they cut my health care and then I have nothing to fight the cancer with. So, like, it's really not like I'm so brave so much as like, I don't want to die.
Right, it's like I'm chained to my desk by my fear of death, right?
Precisely. But like that was one of the things that used to make me so crispy. Oh, you're still working. Did I have an option? We don't live in Canada, all right?
Yeah, we don't live in Canada. And if these guys in the State House have their way, we never will.
We never will.
So tell us a little about your race. I mean, if you don't want to trash your opponent and his cancer-ridden,
I would
corrupt
rather
ass,
talk
let's
about
talk
how
your
wonderful
race.
my neighborhood is and how we deserve some fair representation.
And if we can't get that, we'll settle for more.
I strive for mediocrity. If I overshoot, it's purely by accident. This started out very much as a giggles kind of thing. I was lobbying for the tipped minimum last year and was just banging my head against the brick wall that is the General Assembly, basically going down there every day and saying, hey, we're poor and this is really hard. And hearing the response be, yeah, we know and we don't care. And after 6 months of smashing our heads against that wall, we got a $1 raise for 22,000 workers in Rhode Island, which was the first time that tipped workers had gotten a raise in the state in 30 years. And yes, it was god awful. And yes, it was really hard. And it took way more convincing than it should have to express to people that $3 an hour is not enough to live on, weirdly, and that I can't buy a gallon of milk with an hour's worth of work. But it's neither here nor there. But all I thought was, there's got to be a better way to do this. There's got to be a better way to do this. And then I started working with Jobs with Justice and actively fighting for people who had had their wages stolen. And by being loud and obnoxious, we were really successful. And it gave me this fire in my belly. And I realized that I couldn't just jump from nonprofit to nonprofit every time my neighborhood needed something. And I needed a way to make a more central, effective difference. And I make the joke all the time. I didn't know until I was 13 years old that our officials were elected because I'd had the same senator, representative, and council person since I was born. I was I thought you just got that job. And then when your dad died, he gave it to you. And then when you did, then you give it to, because that's always the way it had worked. And I thought, well, why doesn't anybody like me run? Because obviously the people up there don't know what it's like to be me. Obviously, if I'm having to explain to you how hard it is to live on the measly money that I make, you don't understand what it's like to be poor in this community. My neighborhood has a median income of $15,000 to $20,000 a year, and that goes from single people to families of 4. That's outrageous, and that's just a number if you don't live it. But for these representatives to say oh, I hear you, I feel you, I understand you, you don't, unless you've been there.
I mean, they're really good at phony compassion, I think.
But phony compassion isn't going to get it done. Because when it comes down to it, I had a lot of volunteers on my team who wanted to quit when we wanted to accept the $1 for waitresses. Because originally we wanted to eliminate the sub-minimum wage altogether, and we wanted to go for minimum. And when they offered us the $1, people were offended. They were it's unfair, it's disrespectful. And I said, it's not your $1. You can't tell 22,000 people in this state living in poverty that an extra $1 an hour isn't going to help them. You can't expect me to swallow that pill on what? On principle? Well, being poor is not fun in principle or in practice.
Right. And I think you really brought that one home to me. We talked about this, I think, the first time we talked about anything was we talked about that, and you really drove it home for me how that does make a meaningful difference in the lives of people that have to live it. Even something as simple as, because the way you described it, and I could never hope to match your eloquence, but correct me, I'm too far off. The way you described it is because of the way that tips are computed and the wage is computed, you would have weeks where you would have a negative paycheck, right?
Yeah.
You'd have more taken out for taxes than you earned from your employer, and so you'd have a negative paycheck because the tips were factored in. And so just even $1 to where you don't have a negative paycheck anymore,
where you don't owe taxes at the end of the year.
Yeah. Right. I think that was pretty jarring to me, and it really brought home that this is more meaningful of a difference than I thought. And I guess it makes sense too, because in percentage terms, obviously, if you're going from $2 to $3, that's a 50% raise. Right. So, but at the same time, I think that the point is that we can't stop here. And with the current makeup of the State House, there was this tremendous desire to get you to go away by offering you an olive branch, right? And this is essentially an olive branch. And
you must not know me.
Well, maybe they don't know you, but. I think that we've seen in the last few years this willingness to compromise with the inevitable forces of change. And that's another thing I want to talk about too this week, bringing it back to our earlier conversation. So the Speaker, who has vigorously opposed all ethics reform for a long time. Long story short, there's an ethics oversight committee, but they're not allowed to police the legislature at all. So they have no power. Right.
That one's not 100% on him. That's the Rhode Island Charter.
I'm not saying it's on him.
Specifically,
I'm saying that bills have been dropped that he's opposed. He's had years where he could have dropped a bill that would have helped solve this issue, and he hasn't. Right? He's been content to leave it at that. You're saying, well, you can't put it all on him, but I mean, the buck stops at the top, right? He's the one that makes policy. He's the guy that hands out committee assignments and punishments and legislative grant and free bribe money to all the kids like candy on Halloween, right? So he's the one most culpable for his refusal to act on this. And now the point is, now that I don't know if we would call Galveston his number 2 guy, but he's definitely in the inner circle. Was caught blatantly using these grant programs to line his own pockets through fake charities because there was no oversight. Now there's so much stink on him that he's had to reverse himself and support an ethics bill. But even now, the ethics bill that he's dropped says you can't investigate people, you can't bring charges. They're not allowed to do anything at all in an election year. So because of course the number one thing is that if the machine knows with plenty of time that it's going to have to replace a malfunctioning part, they can, and they'll find some other establishment politician, right? Because I think that's Mattiello's great fear is we're having this year, Galveston is out, and the machine has no point but to get behind this lady Susan, who's running for the seat, and they'll try to run her, but they'd really rather have picked their own guy to replace him, and they would have done that if they'd had more time. You know, I think there's a couple other people. Your race might be one where I think that given more advance notice, they probably have liked to replace him, but now they're sort of stuck with him. There's a few other candidates that are just particularly weak and are vulnerable to ethics issues that haven't even come out yet. And
I think that the solution to corruption is not to make it harder to file corruption charges. You know what I mean? Like, I will agree with that. I mean, that was like Pope Benedict changing the definition of child so that we could say that not a lot of priests were touching them. You know, like,
well, I mean, the guy,
children is only 10 and under, really.
Right.
You know, and
the guy was a Nazi. I mean, let's give him some credit. I mean, he's literally a Nazi.
Literally,
right?
yeah. Well,
like the guy was literally a Hitler Youth.
I know. Side note, though,
But he said he was sorry.
I'm super.
It's all better.
I'm not very religious, but how adorable is the new pope? Like, just side note, like that guy's
Boy,
cute as that. I want to invite him to dinner.
If only our bishop had anything in common with the new pope. I mean, they clearly do not follow the same God.
You know, our bishop actually tells people not to listen to the pope actively.
Yeah.
He's like, the pope's a liar. He doesn't know what he's talking about.
Right.
Jesus is way more rigid than that.
Yeah.
Oh, do
Yeah.
you know him personally? It's weird. Very weird.
This is...
Yeah, sorry, that was like a sidetrack.
Yeah, our bishop, if he had his brothers, he would have voted for the Nazi pope in a second. He probably wishes every day that the Nazi pope were still around.
I wouldn't doubt it. But no, I think that the corruption within our state is kind of perpetuated by the mentality that we have. Like, we are a very insider state where everybody knows everybody and everybody has an opinion about everybody. And how many jobs have you gotten where you didn't personally know somebody there? You know what I mean? Like, not as many as have happened the other way, I'm sure.
I don't know. I mean, as I'd say, it's 50-50, but
50,
yeah.
But
yeah.
like, you've gotten jobs by knowing people.
Yeah.
Have you not? Yeah, that doesn't happen in Texas. You know, that doesn't happen in Maine. You know, where your neighbor is 20 miles out.
I think though that I think that's not actually the case because first of all, it does happen in those places. Like I've gotten jobs by knowing people in other states,
Yes.
so it's not as if it doesn't happen everywhere. And I think really the issue is that it's a small enough state that they have to do more of their business in a place where the public can see it. It's harder for them to shield themselves entirely from the public, right? I mean, if you think about Texas is such a huge state. You know,
You can get away with a lot.
You can get away with a lot, right? I mean, I live my life by two simple rules. Don't go to Texas and don't go to Florida. Because those states, to me, are...
Terrifying.
People talk about corruption in Rhode Island. I don't think any place celebrates corruption as an art form to the extent that Florida and Texas do. But be that as it may. No, I think the same sorts of things go on everywhere. The same sorts of things where like one rep hands off the seat to another. It's just in other states because it's more, because there's more volume, because it's more diffuse, because districts tend to have more people. It's just harder to see the webs of influence, but they're still there. And I think too, the webs of influence here are probably tighter than they are in some of those places.
See, I think you're...
Because they've had the luxury of having really tight webs of influences, because when you have so many representative districts, we have way too many state reps, for example. I'm not talking about, in some abstract sense. I'm talking about if you compare to other states that are much bigger and the number of reps that they have, like by per capita, we have way too many state reps, and clearly having an abundance of state reps and senators has not led to better government. So
well, no, but what I mean to say in the whole Rhode Island is small, and so the corruption becomes more of an issue, is that if you anger the wrong people, you cannot escape their reach. And everybody in this state is so worried about getting flicked off a committee or getting their house evaluated poorly or getting an inspector to ignore them for 6 months when they're trying to get a building permit, that they're willing to let way more slide. That's what I mean to say when I think the tightness of Rhode Island encourages this behavior, is that look at that Go Local Prov article that came out and said that 70% of Rhode Islanders have lost faith in our government. And yet, is there outrage? Are there protesters in the street? Are people losing their damn minds? Are people not paying their taxes? Are people showing up at the State House?
Well, some people aren't paying their taxes.
No, none of that's happening. Because we're so scared that these far-reaching tentacles of political corruption are going to interfere with our already precarious lives, that we're like, it's already bad enough, I don't want to make it worse. And that's not an attitude that you can have.
Well, I think you're right, and it's not an attitude that you can have. But I think that to me, to some extent though, it's like a chihuahua barking. Like it's sound and fury signifying nothing sometimes, because the power of these people, their ability to exert power, isn't as direct as you might think. When we
over you,
well,
over me, okay, over my neighborhood, all they have to do to ruin our lives is put a work requirement on food stamps.
Yeah, but don't kid yourself. They'd all want to do that anyway.
I'm not saying they don't, but I'm saying that the people at the bottom of the ladder live much more precarious lives and are much less likely to speak out against the kind of governmental abuse
that's true.
that they deal
That's
with
true.
because they're so afraid that what little they have is going to be taken.
Right.
Look at the Medicaid budget. People aren't going to complain about that because they're so worried if they complain, they're going to chop it in half again. Oh yeah? Eat it.
Well, I think that though, clearly that logic is flawed, because they're going to chop it anyway. I mean, we're already hearing from Raimondo and Mattiello that they want to chop it more.
No, I agree that it's
chop all
flawed
these things.
logic,
So it's
but
like,
I'm saying it's that's the mindset that we're coming from, that my neighborhood is coming from.
I think
we're coming
that's
from a place of fear, and that's why it's so easy to keep us under the thumb of mismanaged council people and embezzling representatives and things of that nature, because
Right.
we're so downtrodden already, and we're so accustomed to being screwed by the big guy that we'd rather be ignored, because that's at least a little better than you raiding our homes and repoing our cars and taking our licenses away because we owe $80 worth of taxes on a 20-year-old car that as of 3 minutes ago wasn't even applicable for tax rates, but now you've decided that poor people should bear the brunt.
Yeah, and that's kind of what I'm getting at, is that first of all, like, there's nothing more that they can do to the masses as a group than they're already doing. I mean, they're already coming at you and I and all of us collectively as a group as hard as they can. So it's not as if we can win some sort of reprieve. It's like the reprieve of, it really is. It's like if you look at nature dynamics, right? I was watching this great documentary where there's all of these deer, and many of them have horns, right? But the horns are only used to fight with each other for mates. They're not ever used against predators. And so there's a tiny little pack of wolves that shadows this massive pack of deer and picks off a baby here and there, right? And it's like when I'm watching, I root for the wolves because the wolves are in danger, the deer aren't, right? But like in human societies, but there's something to wonder, like, why don't those deer just turn around and gore those freaking wolves? The deer are faster than the wolves, right? If the deer all turned around and decided to run those wolves down, there's nothing the wolves could do about it at all. They'd all be dead. And yeah, they'd take a few deer with them, but I mean, the deer have horns. They can kick a wolf's ass in sufficient numbers, but they don't. They're all trying to not be the hindmost.
And
in nature, that improves the species, right?
Yeah.
In nature, that makes the deer leaner and harder, right? Is by continually having the weak members of the whole herd cold, right? But that's not a dynamic that we should want in our social structure. It doesn't lead to the same outcomes.
No. And our mutual friend Micah Rujo tells me, this organizing story all the time that I love. And I don't know if it's true, but I hope so. He says he used to work at a circus, okay? And
He's worked everywhere.
He's right, which is why I'm like, I wouldn't be shocked if you were like a grifter and hopped a train and like were a circus clown for a year. I wouldn't know.
It's like
I organized unionized the circus clowns. The Union of Circus.
Well, I was telling my dad worked at a space program. I wouldn't be surprised if he says, "Oh yeah, I did too. I was cleaning.
I was also an astronaut.
I was the guy that cleaned the launch pad, right? Or so I was like some guy that had some like essential task that got no glory at all."
So he tells me the story about when the elephants or calves, they put this big chain on the elephant's leg, and like stake it to the ground, and it'll try to break it, but it can't because it's a baby and it just isn't capable. As the elephant gets older, they don't make the chain any bigger because they know that the elephant believes that it's chained there and it can't break the chain. Okay? Now, full-grown bull elephants have figured out that they're bigger than this chain, ripped it out of the ground, and caused a real ruckus before. But they still use this manner because they've convinced the elephant that it's under their thumb, and they're at some point it was, maybe, But as time goes on, you're not anymore. And once you realize that, that's when you get the real power.
Right.
And that's when all the circus performers...
You tear your chains from the ground and you gore that circus master.
Exactly. And like, we, at one point, probably as a state, as a city, as a community, like, didn't have the power. We were under the thumb. But now, that's not the case anymore. I mean, there are so many of us.
And I think that dovetails into the... I'm sorry.
That was the end.
Yeah. I think that dovetails into the next thing I wanted to talk about, which is... So this year is a particularly unique year, in part because of this... wild unpopularity of our state government and these repeated and ongoing corruption scandals. It's funny because they just can't stop kicking themselves and shooting themselves in the head on TV. I mean, like, last year it was the stadium, and then before everybody had time to forget about 38 Studios, they're like, we want to steal this money for the stadium, right? And then they didn't get their stadium, and Mattiello went on TV, Mattiello, Speaker of the House, and he had the most whiny little Dick Nixon, you won't let me have my stadium, little schoolyard bully, deprived of his stolen lunch money, whining, right? I mean, it was pathetic, it was juvenile, because he didn't get his stadium that he wanted. And so then the tolls came out, like, before people had time to forget about the stadium, and people were organizing against the tolls, so they just did it. And I said, well, this week we're approving the tolls, and it's a done deal, you can't do anything about it. And everybody's pissed about that. And then now it's one after another of like, oh, this guy stole hundreds of thousands of dollars. Oh, this guy stole hundreds of thousands of dollars. Oh, this guy stole hundreds of thousands of dollars, right? And now they're saying...
But your pension plans have a negative return.
Right. And your pension plans have a negative return because the state... the governor, back when she was treasurer, was much more interested in enriching the hedge funds. I mean, honestly, I wonder if it weren't for those hedge fund fees and how many of them were laundered into her campaign coffers and her personal pockets through her fictional blind trust. But I wonder how the performance might have changed if the goal of these things weren't just to steal our money. But so these funds have lost money, and of course our new treasurer, who's a Clinton guy, seems nice enough, but hasn't really done anything to curb the hedge fund problem. He says, "Oh, we have contractual obligations, whatever, right? We have a contractual obligation. Not only are we screwed, but we have a contractual obligation to let ourselves keep getting screwed for at least the next 3 years, right? After which time, an appointed committee of hedge fund managers will decide whether or not to renew their contract with us. They screw us for another 5 years, and we won't have any say in that." I'm exaggerating slightly, but you get the idea, right? So, the best that can be said of these people, even the best of them, they're all machine Democrats. They're virtually all lawyers and heirs. They all come from this background of supporting Clinton, supporting the people in power, whoever they are, regardless of anything else, regardless of ideological compatibility, right? Or because really, why would you support Mattiello? I mean, he has no charisma. He's not smart, right? I mean, he has no redeeming personal qualities.
He gave me a raise last year. I am not going to bite the hand that literally fed my baby.
He gave you a raise because you forced him to, right?
I mean, I didn't have a gun to his head. No, I mean, I'm also just a waitress. I mean, he very well could have
right. And what
said
he should
no
have
if he
done,
wanted
what
to.
he should have done is he should have just said we're going to get rid of the tip minimum wage, but he didn't, right? And he didn't because
it would ruin
right.
Rhode Island
and some of those heirs,
kill them all, and everybody would starve, and every restaurant would go out of business.
And blah blah blah, and it's all nonsense.
Well,
but he echoed it.
And
so
and that's not
I'm just
him,
saying,
but that's one of the things that makes me the craziest is when
I'm just saying if somebody, and we'll get to this a little later in the thing later. If somebody sexually harasses you at work, but then they leave a big tip, do you forgive them for the harassment? No, because you're not for sale, right? Like, you appreciate the tip, but in a way, it's almost insulting, right? It says the implication is, hey, I'm paying you because I did these things to you, right? I put you in this uncomfortable place, right? And so, how is that not analogous to what Mattiello's done to waitresses? It's yes, I want you to continue to be enslaved, but I'm going to raise your tips a little bit, right? Monica's making a sour face at me. So, if this topic makes you uncomfortable, we can move on.
I mean, yes, I do agree that eliminating the tipped minimum wage would eliminate the large and rampant unchecked issue of sexual harassment within the restaurant industry. I'm not going to pretend that it wouldn't. I also 100% did not expect to get
even
tipped
$1
minimum wage
you didn't expect
eliminated in the first year that we lobbied for it. I think that's naive. I think to expect a businessman, which is what Mr. Mattiello is, to hike the wages. I mean, that's what he is above everything else, is it not?
No, above everything else, he's a coward. He's a bully, and all bullies are cowards. The fundamental defining trait of a bully is they're all cowards. And so the way that you defeat a bully is you use that to defeat them. Sometimes it means fighting them physically. Sometimes it means getting them afraid of you in a way. But that's how you deal with people who are cowards.
And I think that's why the progressive movement is stalling. Because we are so adamant about being right that righteous indignation can keep you warm at night, friendo, but it's not going to pay your gas bill, okay? And Mattiello knew full well that if he raised the tipped minimum from $2.89 to $9.60, people would have lost their shit. Business owners would not have been able to compensate. And I'm saying a waitress. Time out. Let me finish this. Okay? I'm saying that as a waitress, okay? Because if taxes were voluntary, how many people do you think would pay them? Not a lot. right? Not a lot, okay? So if you give a business owner the option of either paying somebody the minimum wage or paying them significantly less, only somebody who's really shitty at math would pick minimum wage. If you give them an option, of course they're gonna choose lower. That having been said, you cannot expect somebody who's been accustomed to paying $3 a head for a waitress to then triple that amount in a year. That is unreasonable.
See, I think though, I don't think it is. I mean, I think you're depriving yourself of a bit of your own power by saying that, because I think that what happens is in states where they've done this, there are plenty of states where there is no tipped minimum wage, and restaurant owners do just fine.
It's a gradual increase. It doesn't go. They already had higher tipped minimums than we did. We've had the lowest in the country for a not the lowest. I think probably Alabama has the lowest.
Right. I mean, the federal is 213 or whatever.
We have one of the lowest in the country. Okay, so like you're talking about a totally different graduation.
I'm talking about instead of
we weren't asking for 6 and then 8 and then 9. We were asking for 9 today. And when I sat down with reps and they looked at me and said that I was greedy, I would give them this analogy, okay? I said, I came home to my dad when I was 18 years old and I looked him in the face and I said, Dad, I'm pregnant. And he was mad. He was so mad. And after about 10 minutes of him being real mad, I was like, okay, so listen, I'm not pregnant, but I did get a $600 speeding ticket. It sounds much more, it's not like a lifelong commitment now, right? You know, that's like a much, the 600's like all right, we can work with that. You know, and we knew asking for 9 that they weren't going to give us 9. We're not stupid.
Well, I know that,
but it made it easier when we asked for $1. And you have to be able to compromise with these people. You can't just be the thumb in their eye and the thorn in their paw and expect to get anything done. Because yeah, we're right, but we're still struggling.
I just don't think. I think that the whole mentality of compromise presupposes that you're dealing with people who can be dealt with, who aren't fundamentally treacherous and dishonest, right? Like, I don't see, like...
And you're basing it off of the idea that people can't change.
Well, I don't know that people can change. I know that people usually change for the worse.
Look at Paul Ryan.
What about Paul? Oh, you're going to say Paul Ryan is your exemplar of the possibility of human redemption.
Republican redemption, maybe.
No.
That's about as close as I think a Republican can come to redemption.
Paul Ryan, here's another good example. So, just to bring our viewers up to speed, our listeners up to speed, all 6 of them. So, Paul Ryan, this last week, he said, well, I can't endorse Trump yet.
Oh, no,
I'm thinking
that's not
about
what I'm
it.
talking about.
Oh, okay. All right.
I was talking about when he came out, I guess it was probably a month ago now, and said that his quote during the Romney campaign about the makers and the takers was fundamentally flawed. He said that he spent a lot of his adult life believing that people who lived on social services and relied on social service nets were lesser people who did not work as hard. And do you know what changed his mind? Talking to them.
See, I think that you're taking an example of a cynical, worthless political hack engaged in a stunt designed to shore up his position and allow him to rebrand himself, and you're taking it as an example of actual transformation. I think that when Paul Ryan looks at us, he sees the same thing that he's always seen when he looks at us, is shit to be scraped off his shoes. So I don't
think that that's a really miserable way to go about the world,
well,
Grant.
then you're on the wrong podcast, because that's what we do here. The point is not that we should have no hope. The point is that we should recognize that that hope is difficult, right?
So what do you want? Do you want me to go if I win? If
Yes.
I win this campaign, do you want me to just go up and stab every rep in the eye that I think has taken an eye from my community?
Oh,
Would that be Gandhi enough?
You won't need to do that, because there'll be other people doing it for you. David Norton, I think, is determined to alienate everybody in the machine, and he's done a great job of that. And I think we can continue to allow him to piss these people off and really just show that they have no clothes.
See, but for
because
me,
your perspective is that
they are not my priority. My neighbors are my priority. My priority isn't to shit talk Gina Raimondo or piss off Nick Mattiello or call Leo Skenyon names.
Right.
That's not my
so-
priority is to make life a little bit easier for Carmen next door, whose 1996 Subaru somehow this year is worth $2,000 more than it was last year. My priority is to make sure that Kathleen doesn't have to send her niece to a school that's 4 miles away across 2 main roads because Providence has decided that the lottery system is totally okay for our education. That's my priority. And so, like, I appreciate that, like, yes, there have been representatives and there have been legislators who have not done things to the best of their capability, to the best of our designs, to the best of, but there's nothing I can do about that now. The best I can do now is to help every single one of my neighbors that asks for it. And I'm not going to focus my time on saying what a shithead Gallison is or how god-awful Jackson is because everybody knows it. It's a moot point. That doesn't help my neighborhood. What helps my neighborhood is going out there every day on doors and finding out what matters to these people and how they've been neglected and what it is they need. And that's like the fundamental difference between the talking and the doing is that, like, yeah, we can talk about how awful these people are, but that's not going to change anything. If we go out there and rally our neighbors and sit outside on the State House steps, you're right, we are going to get the dollar every single time.
Well, and that's I think that I'm not saying that you're, and I think that's a very strong argument for why you should be a rep, but you can't deny that a lot of those same problems you just mentioned have been dramatically exacerbated in recent history by some of these same actors, right? So I know that you're not running in Gallison's district, so it doesn't directly impact you, right? But let's not forget, we just talked about the Medicaid cuts, right? Who was the architect of these cuts, right? Do you think that you're going to convince them? I mean, there was a great analogy about healing, where somebody said, if you stab me in the back and you take the knife out, that's not healing, right? So I would say these people, they knocked you down and they put their boot on your throat, and now you're saying, just take the boot off and we'll all be good, right? And I'm not saying that it's not a laudable short-term goal. I'm only saying that in the long run, right, your neighborhood's success or failure is tied to the greater political culture of the state.
I'm not saying take the boot off and we're good. I'm saying take the boot off. I'm going to go heal up and come back with reinforcements. I'm not going to try and fight you with a broken neck.
So you're saying that you don't really disagree with anything that I'm saying. You're just more concerned with the short term than the long term or the near term.
I'm more concerned with people than I am with politicians because I do not believe that politicians are people. And I say that knowing that I'm theoretically, hopefully about to join the ranks. I think that if you give people the opportunity, they will sometimes surprise you. But if you don't ever give them the opportunity, they never will. And so we can sit here all day and say that the entire General Assembly is full of scumbags and liars and cheats, but...
Well, no, I don't think the entire General Assembly is full of scumbags and liars.
I mean, I can name like 3
but
that
I
are
do
like
think,
decent people.
I do think that
Possibly
the leadership,
4.
I do think that the person in charge of the State House, the guy that they all vote for, is a stupid coward, right?
Okay, and what happens if you vote no?
What happens if you vote no for the... Right, he punishes you because he's a bully. He's a thug. That's what he does.
Okay, so is that... Do you think that's worth it?
Well...
To be the only no vote?
No, it's not worth it to be the only no vote. It's true. It's true.
Do you think it... Like, so if your rep voted yes for the speaker, would you automatically hate your rep?
So if my rep voted yes for the speaker, which is sort of... This is all a moot point because I do hate my rep. But... If I liked my rep but they voted yes for the speaker, it would cause me to find them as being, to question their fundamental trustworthiness. Yeah, because I think that
They
you vote
want
for
to
the
get
speaker.
along with others? Because they want to get bills passed? Because they want to do better things? You think that makes them shittier people? Because
I didn't say that. I said it makes them suspect. So I'm not
I'm gonna buy
interested in
that.
somebody. I'm not interested in somebody who's my friend right up until the moment of decision, and then they're not. Right? I mean, you yourself, and I could throw this in your face. You yourself have complained about how people, they didn't have your back. You thought they were family, but they didn't have your back when you needed it most. Right? So I've got plenty of friends who are my friends right up until I need something from them, and then they're not my friends anymore, right? I don't need, as in my state rep, this person who's supposed to represent my area's interests, I don't need them to make friends with people who aren't worth being friends with. You know, I find it more liberating to cut bad people out of my life than I do to find a way to work with them and to keep them in my life.
And I don't necessarily agree. I come from a very different background. I grew up with a crazy brother. And I don't mean like, he's insane. I mean like, we the jury find the defendant. Like, he's nuts. He's homeless and addicted to heroin, and people in the neighborhood call him Napoleon Dynamite because he shares a likeness. And I consistently say, man, it's gotta be tough being that crazy. Because people are people. And people became who they are, not 100% through any fault of their own. And I think to dismiss any person is unfair. To say, I refuse to acknowledge that you as a person are valued the same as I as a person am because your opinions differ from mine. Because that's essentially what you're saying. Is that Nick Mattiello has a different lifestyle and a different set of opinions from you, and therefore anybody who agrees with or abides by those opinions is an asshole.
No, I said that they were suspect. So you asked me, the question you asked me is if you're state rep, I would say I would find that person fundamentally suspect. I would wonder. I didn't say that you can conclude. It's one decision in isolation, right? So there are people that voted for Mattiello where I know them and I respect them enough to where I can understand why they did what they did. And then there are other people who voted for Mattiello because I feel like they share my values at their heart, but their ambition is more important to them than their values, right? And so whenever a decision point comes up between complicity or integrity, they'll always choose complicity if it serves their ambitions. And so that's useless to me. That kind of friend is useless to me, right? In fact, they're worse than useless. They're a hindrance, right? They're somebody that's constantly going to be in my way. I don't want to get into my family situation.
I'm ambitious
but when you're talking,
for my neighborhood. You know what I mean? Like, it's one thing if you're ambitious with selfish purposes, but like, I am willing to be cutthroat and ruthless for my neighbors. I will admit that hands down.
Well, and that's the difference between you and some of these other people that I'm talking about who are ambitious only for themselves and who ultimately view their communities as a means to an end.
Listen, I'm a waitress, okay? Like, I'm not gonna get any fundamental, like, life-changing anything from being a representative. Like, this is a lot of work for not a lot of reward, okay? But that's why I'm doing it. Because I can't just sit here and say, wow, this really sucks. Wish somebody would fix it if I'm not going to bother trying. You know what I mean?
Well, I think that is the fundamental point, is that you have to try. I think we're just having a disagreement then about tactics, right? So I'm not saying that you should sit around and grouse or that anybody should sit around and grouse. I'm only saying that in my analysis, it seems to be a little different than yours, that the scope of the problem is such that that going along to get along just isn't going to go. No, it isn't. It's on a ton of people. But when you have,
we've created this habitat where these kind of individuals thrive.
Right, and if you want to destroy the habitat, how do you do it? Right? Do you do it by
loud Beyonce music on repeat?
Yeah. Good luck with that.
I was kidding. Beyonce's queen.
Right. I think that you you can go to the State House, and the vast majority of worthy bills that get dropped at the State House, they go into a committee, and sometimes very energetic, and I've attended plenty of these meetings, I'm sure you have, sometimes very energetic people will show up at the State House, and they'll really believe in participatory democracy, and they'll go to a committee meeting where their bill is being discussed, and like the committee hears, but nobody who's not already supportive of the bill even bothers to show up. I've had that experience on multiple occasions. The last time I went to the State House, it was just 5 hours of being told by a bunch of people how much they respected us, and then they held all bills for further study, which is their Orwellian way of saying they killed it, right? So it's like to me, why do you hear testimony? You hear testimony because you want people to think that they have the trappings of a democracy, when really decisions are just made from on high. And the way that you change that is you get enough people, you get that critical mass of people in there. Like in your example, should one person be the first to vote no against Mattiello? Well, that's a tough nut to sell. If everybody's voting yes for him and you're the only one that votes no, right? Well, you could say, well, why not vote yes? But then on the other hand, he can't take your seat away. So what can he do to you, right? We can fight you on your priorities, but he might have done that anyway. So it's like, what's the payoff for my yes vote versus not? But even then, like, let's say there's 10 people. Let's say that almost half the House wants somebody else, right? Well, then what's he gonna? He's gonna keep all of you. He's gonna keep half the House off committees. Is he gonna deny all funding to half of your seats? That's a great way for him to lose the speakership the following cycle, right? So I think the key needs to be getting that critical mass of people who are thinking, instead of how can I advance my own agenda, my own ambitions, are thinking, how can I be part of an engine that destroys this habitat, right?
I feel like we have fundamentally different ideas of what a state rep's role is. I mean, yes, do I want to fight corruption at the State House? Obviously. I mean, if people stopped stealing money, we might not have such horrible deficits. But do I think that being right is more important than my neighbors having health care? No, not at all. I don't care about being right. I'm wrong all the time.
Well, I think that I'm not trying to make the argument that you should care about being right more than you care about the lives of real people.
No, I just feel it seems very much like your idea of the campaign trail is above all kill leadership, kill them dead, then light their houses on fire, then kill their pets, then light their pets' houses on fire.
Well,
and like
we're
that
not going to
just
kill the
seems
pets. I mean,
like
come
a
on.
really okay, maybe at some point we'll get to the, pitchforks and torches, but right now things are so awful. Like, I'm way more focused on helping people than I am hurting people. We've had a General Assembly focused on hurting people. We've had a General Assembly focused on stealing money from underprivileged kids that were supposed to send them to college. Allison. We've had a GA that's been dedicated to robbing little leaguers. You know what I mean? What we haven't had is a GA full of representatives that are dedicated to trash pickup or rec rooms or after school programs. And that's what I want to spend my time on. I don't want to spend my time sticking my thumb in people's eyes because I don't care. I'm not here to make enemies. I'm here to make life for my friends a little more manageable.
And I'm sure they would say the same thing.
The reps?
Yes,
Yeah.
I'm sure that's exactly what Mattiello would say, is that he's there to make life for his friends a little more manageable.
Yes, but my friends are
But your friends are good, right?
That's so, now you make me sound like a scumbag. You went through an hour just to get me to sound like a douche at the end?
I'm sorry.
I'm like, yeah,
I'm
I know.
sorry. We can cut that part out.
Call me the new Buddy Cianci. I'll just start hitting people with fireplace logs.
I think it's impressive how passionately focused you are on your neighborhood. Sometimes, as one of the reasons I was a terrible candidate is that I find it difficult to connect to people, on that sort of level, right? So, to me, it's all about grand problems and grand threats, but it's not micro level at all. I don't have that focus, right? And so it's just it's extremely difficult for me to engage with issues that do matter to people, because it's my way of thinking tends to lead me off on a tangent where I'm like, well,
that's such a first world problem.
Well, it's not. I mean, I just mean like, yeah. So like, one of the big complaints in my neighborhood is graffiti and houses that look bad, and I'm like, yeah, that's because Elmhurst is white and relatively affluent compared to some of the neighborhoods that are right around it, right? Providence having this strange micro-segregation that other cities, their segregation is much more broad strokes, whereas here, where segregation can be like, these 4 blocks are only for brown people, and then we're gonna give them a little bubble, and then we're gonna take half a streets, they can be connected to the brown people district, and so but be that as it may, I tend to see, well, if X is a problem, the X is a problem because it's part of this broader social problem, and that all of these problems are connected, and if we don't deal with the root cause of this symptom, then we'll never really be able to deal with the symptom. But that sort of thinking does lend itself all too often to just dismissing everything as a symptom, right? So if you have people being hurt at a local level, instead of thinking, well, we should try to help them, I'm much more prone than you, clearly, to think, well, it's a war and people die. Let's focus on taking the hill, right?
That's depressing. Okay.
Well, that's how I think.
Well,
I'm just trying to be honest about the defects of my
like,
way of thinking.
I also live in a community where we're not...
I mean, really, the takeaway should not be that Maura is not a D-bag and that I'm not, right? That should not be the listener's takeaway from this podcast.
What I mean is that, like, in my neighborhood, that's not what people are complaining about.
Right.
People aren't complaining about graffiti on houses. I have a neighbor who's complaining about the fact that she's about to lose her house because she has fibromyalgia and her prescriptions cost her $700 a month. And
Right.
so I don't necessarily relate to that kind of thing because I would totally have the same reaction if my neighbors were like, they're graffiti. I'd be like, really? Really? Because kids are starving. Could you shut your mouth? Thanks. Because
Sure.
kids are starving.
But that's-
But that's how I feel in terms of you being like, well, Nick Mattiello uses campaign funds to take people out to dinner. I'm like, yeah, and my neighbors are living with no heat, hot water, or electricity
Right,
because their landlords are scumbags. So like, really,
And that's an
I don't
example.
really care.
That's an example of what I'm talking about, because you say their landlords are scumbags, and I say their landlords contribute to Mattiello's victory fund, right? But like you talk about healthcare and fibromyalgia, I would say, well, this is why we need single payer, right? We need to be more like Canada, like we talked about earlier, and so we're not going to get single payer through incrementalism. We need a fundamentally different structure before we can have
we're
it
not
there.
going to get single payer in Rhode Island until we get single payer in New England.
I think
because-
you're probably right. Yeah.
Well, just based on the way that single payer works, you have to be able to bargain with the insurance companies, and we're too damn small. They'd screw us.
Well, it's true.
Like, my feeling is if we were in like a conglomerate of northeastern states, we would have more of an opportunity to be competitive in terms of pricing. But because we still have such a small population in comparison to what they're accustomed to dealing with on such a grand scale, they'll just look at us and laugh and be like, it's still $700 a pill, but good try though. That was adorable,
right.
And so that's my main concern. Not to say that I clearly want single payer. I'm poor.
Right,
Obviously,
but you
I want
see,
single payer.
you see what I'm saying. Like the defect of my worldview is I want to spend all of my time focusing on like the grand strategy of how do we get to single payer, right? And so it's easy and convenient for me not to care. Not that I don't care, but it's difficult for me to connect emotionally, and it's hard for me a lot of times to relate to somebody on the micro level, because the person on the micro level, they don't care. Your neighbor doesn't care if anybody else gets fibromyalgia pills. It's not going to matter to her if she gets thrown out of her house when she's homeless, right? So we have to meet your neighbor's needs before we can organize your neighbor to try to fight the power, right? And I understand that. It's just difficult for me because I think for every one of your neighbors who has a Maura Walsh to fight for her, there's a million other people in a million other situations that are as bad, slightly better, or slightly worse, right? Who don't have a Maura Walsh to fight for them, who will be screwed if we don't find a way to help all of them by transforming the structure, right? And so that's all I'm saying. I mean, I I actually really respect your perspective. It's just difficult for me.
Well,
It's just difficult for me to see the world in that way.
it was also, I mean, it's my experience that's brought me here. I mean, I remember having emails and calls from people who got a 50-cent raise and noticed, and it made a difference. You know what I mean? Like, I watched 6 workers at Teriyaki House get thousands of dollars in back wages. You know, I know that if you actually fight for change, you can cause real change. But I don't know from personal experience that you can go up and fight corruption with an iron fist on day one, because I haven't tried it. You know, and right now my neighborhood is in such disarray that to me the machine and leadership
Right.
and that whole thing, that's graffiti.
Yeah, I understand. I
That's
understand.
graffiti on the foundation of your house. That's adorable that's what you focus on for problems, but like, we're starving.
Right.
So we'll get to that once we're not starving.
Well, I think this was good. So I don't feel that you came off as a d-bag, but I guess our listeners will make up their own minds about that. We're running low on time, but there is one more thing I wanted to talk about, and I think it's a real downer of a topic. So it's a good place to end on. It's traditional we end one that's the saddest.
Is it?
one.
Okay.
Yeah. So we talked about. So I wanted to talk to you about modern feminism, right, and the profound difficulties of modern feminism, because it's interesting how, you know, a brief historical overview, and this is really too brief, but we have the 50s, you know, women are needed to rivet, so they go to rivet. You know, the men come back from war, and we got to get the women, you know, we got them to take
Stop
their shoes
riveting.
off. Right, take your shoes off, go back in the kitchen and make me a sandwich, right? And so there was this huge backlash against that from the women who were used to being empowered workers during the wartime era, and now they're trying to the culture's trying to force them back into a servile role, right? And so we have this surgence of feminism in that era where we're talking about like Betty Friedan and the feminine mystique, and then somehow in the 80s, in the 70s and the 80s, right, we had the 60s, we had this period of women's liberation, we had the discovery of the pill, we had this period of time where it seemed like real gains were going to be made. We had the Equal Rights Amendment, right? And then all of it got co-opted and went away, right? And now modern feminism is Barbie wears a business suit, right? But she's still a Barbie. You know, Barbie comes in multiple skin tones. Well, that's great and all, but, you know, the problem isn't that we don't have enough flavors of Barbie. The problem is Barbie, right? The problem isn't that, you know, a lot of emphasis has been made, especially recently, because of you know a number of high profile events, right? We've got the Hillary Clinton campaign, and we've had a couple of. There was the Kim Kardashian nude selfie a few weeks ago, and there was I haven't seen Beyonce's video. I hear it's great, but
It's amazing.
yeah, I have terrible taste in music,
I'm
so.
actually like deliberately offended that you just put Beyonce in a row with Hillary Clinton. And
Well,
Kim
I'd have to see it.
Kardashian.
I'd have to see it. It's just interesting when people who are already rich and famous try to use the language of empowerment, which maybe that has nothing at all to do with what Beyonce is doing. So I haven't seen her videos. So maybe I shouldn't talk.
Lemonade is my Bible, and I really need you to like stop
Okay.
talking about.
Well, I'm in the
Stop talking
process
about
of.
it. You
I'm
need
in
to
the
you need
process
to
of
watch it.
retracting
You need to watch it before you talk shit.
All
She is
right.
our queen. Bow before the queen.
So-
anyway,
So, but clearly we can talk
my
about
neighbors
Hillary Clinton.
already right now hate you so much.
Clearly we can talk about. Well, I just don't know the music. I'm not trying to. I'm only saying that there is this trend. Whether or not Beyonce is an example of it, I'll table that one for now. There's definitely this trend. I think we can agree on this of like women that are already powerful and successful trying to talk about how great
hard it
feminism
is to be powerful and successful.
Right, exactly. It's like, you know,
Started from the bottom, now we're here. Started from the bottom as a child of an Olympian, and now we're
Yeah,
here.
yeah, you
Started
know-
from the bottom as a lawyer from a rich family, and now
Right.
what bottom are we talking about?
Exactly.
You had an in-ground pool.
Exactly. It's like people talk about Emma Watson, for example. You know, she was Hermione, and now everybody knows her face, and she's supposed to be this great exemplar of feminism. And it's not that there's anything wrong with people who have fame and wealth talking about feminism, but it invariably becomes a very
feminism.
a very white, a very higher class feminism, right? It's not about it's like how we get to a point where abortion is about Roe v. Wade, where in reality most women can't get abortions because there's no abortion clinic
Because
anywhere
lack of
near.
access. Yeah,
Right,
it has
because
nothing
of
to do
access.
with illegal
Right,
or not.
right.
It's because
But if
there's
you're-
one abortion clinic in all of Texas.
But if you're rich, access is irrelevant, right? You only care about the right because you can always get on your private jet and fly to wherever the clinic is, right? And you can always use your money to buy immediate seating, right? And you can always push back as long as it's not illegal, you're fine, right? Whereas and even if it was illegal, it's just not that crucial of an issue to you because you can always just hop on a plane to a country where it is legal and get it done, you know, over the weekend. So the issue is access, exactly. And access is an issue that gets a lot less play. And every so often you'll see some media celebrity talk about it. And it's interesting because a lot of times it's a man. Like I think John Oliver talked about it once. And it's like, have we sung so? Louis C.K. talks about feminism sometimes, and there's a couple of other
Have
like
we sunk
famous
so low
like,
that we have to have it fed to us by white men in suits?
well
You know, like
But
I
that's-
can't
the-
digest feminism unless it's told to me by a man.
by a white man, right? Exactly, and that's the place we've arrived at with the patriarchy is that we still instinctively look to white rich people, predominantly male white rich people, as our thought leaders, right?
Do not
and we don't
take
look at
credit away from asshole rich white women because they are also they're pretty bad too. Okay,
I don't
and
want to say that. I'm just saying that you know, and we have and the point is not that there's anything wrong with being a rich white feminist man, right? In fact, that's a good thing. I mean, if every rich white man
Were
were
identified
also
as
a
a
feminist,
feminist, yeah, maybe
that
it
would
wouldn't
be
be so shocking.
progress. That would be success. That would be something to celebrate. But you know, real feminism is losing ground. I feel like, you know, we have all of these. I go to work and I read about all these protected classes under the law, right? But my workplace experience doesn't actually reflect that. And your workplace experience, of course, like sexual harassment as a waitress, based on all accounts, I mean, I'm sure you could tell me some stories, but based on every account I've ever had with a waitress, sexual harassment is pretty much a daily event in that industry, right?
Absolutely.
And if you're lucky, it's a daily event from only the customers and not your boss, right?
So true. So sad. So true. I remember saying to a restaurant owner that I used to work for, you don't think it's kind of a conflict of interest that you're the person I'm supposed to report sexual harassment to and you're the person who regularly sexually harasses me? And he was like, hey, it's a conundrum. I designed it that way. And walked
Ha
out.
ha ha! Isn't that special?
Joke's on you.
Yeah.
No, I struggle with white feminism because I mean, obviously I am white, but it's something that offends me so deeply that like I get really upset if anybody ever called me a white feminist, I'd be like, no, that's exactly what I don't want.
Right.
And whenever I'm trying to explain it to people, I always say, the Free the Nipple movement is the best example I can come up with of white feminism. Because if you have so few problems that you can focus on wanting your titties to fly free when you're jogging, you do not know what it's like to be a woman of color living in the inner city.
Right. And you know, I think that there isn't an easy solution to this. One of the biggest problems that it's a challenge I think all progressive organizations struggle with, no matter where you are, what you're doing. Creating those bonds to other communities is just really hard, right?
It's It's
And
not. It's only really hard if you think of it as those communities. You know what I mean? Like the catch-22 is everybody's like, oh, well, we can't talk to this person because they're not involved in the community, so they're not going to want to get involved in the community. Well, they're not getting involved in the community because you've never talked to them and asked them to get involved in the community.
well, you say that, but I think it's more complicated. I think that's an oversimplification. So there's
I
definitely
think that you live in a
there's
very white
definitely
neighborhood, and so it's probably more.
well, there's definitely
complicated for you.
validity. There's definitely validity to what you're saying. I would never begin to say that you're not describing a real thing there. But I think that the problem it even goes further than that, because if you're an all-white organization, right? I can't tell you half a dozen times I've been in a room of people, and it's a room of all white people, or of mostly white people, and we're like, how can we get more people of color here, right? And I'll make 20 suggestions and they'll all be rejected as impractical, right?
And then you do none of them.
And then we do none of them. We do nothing, and then the end up solution is, okay, let's find the darkest skinned rich person we can find, right? So like at the Progressive Dems, it's like, well, we need more people of color to be involved with the organization, right? But the conclusion, unless I find some other resolution to it, I know that left their own devices, they're just going to find some brown grad who happens to have swarthy complexion, whatever, right? Like, I'm not saying that those voices aren't valuable, but we need more than people who want to be the token minority as a part of their job application for grander and greater things. And there are those people that are professional, I'm the token minority on an organization, right? They hop from board to board, they build their resume, right? And it's easy for them to get on boards. But what we really need we need to forge bonds with community organizations that we just don't know anything about.
Then you
right?
need to look outside of Brown.
Well, and that's the point I was trying to make, but it's not easy, if you go into an area.
Have you?
I have, and you go into an area that's I actually was I could tell you a personal story, but it's not relevant to the podcast. It'll take too long to explain. So the point is, you can go into neighborhoods but if you just go the first time, it's uncomfortable. And people ask, why are you here? And you say, well, I'm trying to recruit for my board. And people like, oh, okay, right? Like, you need to have established a pattern of actually working within a community before you can build the trust you need to make an ask, right? Because what all too often I think happens is you go into a community for a brief period of time to accomplish a specific mission, and then you leave, right? And I think a lot of these disparate community organizations, they're like, it's not worth investing in these joiners and leavers. It's better to just do our own thing as our own plan of attack. And as a result, I don't think any of these community organizations, they don't coordinate, they don't talk to each other. And I don't know how to crack through that easily, right? I don't think it's as simple as just, go to a neighborhood and start attending meetings so that you can get somebody on your board, right? Because that's not seen as credible, right?
It's
you have to go to an organization
and give a shit.
And give a shit. You have to commit yourself to an institutional investment in that neighborhood before you get any promise of payoff. And that's a very tough sell to your membership of any organization. You're saying, we're all from the east side. You want us all to go into a community where we have no investment and work on their issues? Can't we at least work on some east side issues? Well, I guess we can work on some, since that's where all of our members are from. And then sooner or later, you just do what you always have done, right? And it all reduces to the same thing, right? And it's not a result of malice. It's a result of people not having the willingness to work without promise of payoff, and of the standard difficulty that we all feel, the discomfort that at least every white person feels when confronted with the true horror of American racism, which our lives so easily shield us from,
So one of the more selfish reasons that I'm running for state representative is my son is half Dominican. Mm-hmm. And I did not realize until I had a Hispanic baby what an advantage I had as a white woman. Because I'd always had the disadvantage of being a woman and didn't really see the privilege of being white until I had a baby that wasn't. Not to harp on Beyonce, but there's a song in her new album where it's all these mothers from the Black Lives Movement, I'm getting all verklempt, holding up pictures of their kids. And just sitting in chairs while the song plays in the background while they hold pictures of their kids. And I can't hold my son and listen to that song because my son's not white. And that's not inherently unplausible that he could be the victim of police brutality.
Or even some crazy vigilante who's not even a cop, right?
Right.
Like Trayvon Martin.
Yeah, exactly. You know what I mean? Like, I will not ever pretend to know what it's like to face that every day. And I only know it on a very, very small scale in terms of my son being slightly darker complexioned and having a Spanish-y sounding last name to white people. Caminero? Caminero. It's really not that hard, guys. It's like, it's just one long, forget it. Anyway, gringos.
What can you do?
Well, what are you going to do? But, I mean, in a very selfish way, it wasn't until I realized, holy crap, my kid doesn't have the protections that I have, that I started to care more. And that's a horrible thing. That's a horrible thing. But if every white person had a little bit of guilt, just a little more guilt than they actually have, like, maybe we could start to make a difference. You know what I mean? And it's when people say, "Oh, it's not an issue anymore," and I'm like,
No, it's a huge issue.
When Malcolm Caminero applies for a first job, I know he's not going to get the same opportunities as Malcolm Walsh would have. And until such a time as you can say with certainty that he is, we're not doing it right.
No, and I think that's essentially a small aspect of what I'm talking about, is that racism is horrible and all humans seek comfort. And as a white person, to go your whole life, you could go your whole life without ever seeing a black person except on TV, right? Everything is segregated for you, right? Your neighborhoods are segregated, your places of employment are segregated, everything is segregated for you, right? And it used to be legal segregation. Now it's all illegal and informal, but it still happens, right? And so you can have these people that come from privileged backgrounds that just truly believe that racism is over because they've never had to come to face with it in their entire lives, right? And I didn't choose to be shielded from race as a white person. You know, I try to engage. I do, carve it on my tombstone. Well, he tried, right? But it's just so fucking horrible, right? Forgive me for swearing, podcast listeners, but race is so terrible that that even a little glimpse of it leads to profound white discomfort, right? Leads to this sense of shame and outrage because I didn't choose to be in a bubble, right? I grew up in Oregon. Well, there weren't allowed to be black people in Oregon when the colony was found, when the province was founded. The Constitution said no black people, right? Yes, and they didn't take that out until I think the 70s, wow. Which is about when they stopped trying to annihilate the Navajo culture, because it was the official policy of the U.S. government to annihilate the Navajo culture under the guise of doing them a favor, right? This was after, of course...
you're welcome.
Right. It was after, of course, like the Navajo language being instrumental.
Smallpox blankets, and you weren't even grateful about it.
Crap, we didn't kill all of them. Well, let's assimilate the survivors, right? Let's destroy their culture completely. And so they didn't even change that officially until the 70s. And so when I grew up in Oregon, there were no black people, right? I didn't ever see them. We didn't need segregation because there wasn't anyone to segregate, because it was like a gated whites only state, right? Every time. Now, I didn't know that, right? I played no part in that decision.
And then you moved and you were like, whoa, people got tan.
Well, at first, when I first left the state as a teenager, yeah, I mean, a couple of times it was off-putting. It was like, wow, I didn't realize like people were so racially different across the country. Like
I thought they all looked like me.
I thought they all were white because they were all white in books and on TV, right?
Yeah.
Except for a small number of token minorities, right? And which we had like
See, now
one or two
I've
of
had
those
the
already.
exact opposite
Right.
experience, in that I've always grown up in Providence, and like I've always gone to like inner city schools.
Right,
And, like
but-
I didn't know that all cities weren't like this.
But
and then
even-
I have like cousins and stuff who live in like Chepachet and Burrville, and there's like one, Pacific Islander that they call a minority, and they're like,
Right.
yeah, he's half Laotian.
Right.
And that's the one guy we've got that's not white. And you're like, wow, you got a whole town, Burrville, like a whole town
Yeah.
of people
And
without.
there's lots of places in Rhode Island where you can go.
But like I didn't know that until I was like much older. I was like, this is like a very, why are there no black people here? Like I
Yeah.
don't. They're like, oh, black people don't live here. I'm like, I didn't know that was a.
You can do that? I didn't know that was a thing.
Yeah.
Isn't that illegal? Can't you not do that? They're like, well, I mean, yeah, it's illegal, but they do it.
But they do it.
okay.
They do it. Yeah. And that's I think that's a great down note.
Well, that's the naivety of growing up in a poor community, okay? Is that like poor people, as you said at the beginning, like at the top, they don't see race and color, they see nobility. You know what I mean? And that's kind of how we feel at the bottom too. We're like, no, I don't see, you're just as poor as I am, as poor as he is, as poor as she is. Like, I don't care that you're black and poor, or Spanish and poor, or Muslim and poor, or Syrian and poor. Like, we're all just poor. Like, let's just help each other and throw a barbecue. I get the buns, you get the hot dogs. Let's go.
Right. Well, I think that's a good down note. I think to leave the podcast on. I did want to.
It was a little too upbeat. Sorry, we ended it on a barbecue note.
Yeah, I mean, I think you had to throw in that barbecue so the existential misery wouldn't overwhelm you, because it's pretty horrible, and that's what I'm saying is that all of that,
All those feels
Every-
are good, I guess.
every good memory from childhood, which fortunately there aren't that many good memories to be tainted, but of those few good memories I have in my childhood, they're all tainted now because I know this now.
Because you grew up in a racist.
Because I grew up in a state that was.
man, I thought they just really liked saltines.
I didn't know.
And that's why
I
they
didn't
called
know.
us all crap.
I didn't know it was in the state's constitution, right? And obviously that's kind of that's something analogous to that. I think is true of all white people of privilege. Although pretty much are there any white people that aren't of privilege? But that's just what white privilege is all about. It's that's the biggest part of the privilege is not having to know this stuff.
Yep.
Right? It's not having to see it.
Yep.
You have to confront all of that. The more you learn, the more uncomfortable it is.
But the closer you get to fixing it.
Well, I mean,
The truth hurts, and then it sets you free. But first it hurts.
well, I don't know that the truth sets you free, but it definitely hurts. So, all right. Well, thank you so much for being on the podcast.
Thank you for
Lauren.
having me.
Ran a little long, but I think that was fun. So, thank you all for listening, and we'll see you next week.